Gate 35, the gate of change, the gate of progress. And we have line 2, creative block. Ra said that this can be a brutal line if you are not aware of the mechanic. The lifetime learning says lack of inspiration, which stops progress. The collective is impersonal. We've mentioned this a few times. And it's why the stream of feelings that drives up from gate 41 in the root presents so many problems, really, especially in the sexual arena, because by its very nature, the collective is impersonal. And we're not taught how not to take this kind of stuff personally. So we end up getting hurt. The stream of feeling moves through gate 30, which is the gate of the Muse. And the Muse is either there or she's not. And there's nothing you can do about it. If you're blocked and you try to force it through and yet you don't have the energy, then you end up being conditioned by others, or you just crumble from exhaustion, fatigue, frustration. At its core, this is about putting your hands up in surrender. Really, it's just about learning to let go into the mechanic, into the process. And this is a second line, of course. They're not really aware of what's going on around them. They're not really aware of the Muse. They're just busy doing their thing. And then all of a sudden, that creative process just isn't there anymore. And there's a huge potential for depression. Instead of just sitting back and waiting for it to return, because it does always come back. We might not know when, we have no control over the timing, but it always does, because it's a cycle, beginnings and endings. Look at the format in the 53, 42. It's always going to come back. The exaltation, attunement with the vagaries of the Muse, and the recognition that creativity is energy that ebbs and flows. Creativity and the Muse will always come and go. And in the detriment, the need to take action, however mundane, to overcome the feelings of emptiness. The actions being uninspired and so do not further progress. The need for change and the fear of stasis. So these are people who can get incredibly upset when they can't continue their process. And then they'll go and jump into something just for the hell of it because they think it's going to make them feel good and maybe it'll get their creative juices going again. And it doesn't often work that way. And this just goes back to living out your own nature. Everything goes back to living out your own nature. Everything in human design is strategy and authority and engaging with life correctly and shooing away starlings who, they're supposed to be an endangered species. There's so many of them around here. They'll be endangered if they keep stealing my sultanas, I tell you. But that's going to be their experience. But everything goes back to strategy and authority. Waiting can be really difficult when you've got this creative block hanging over you. Many people find when they begin to experiment with their design that their relationships change. People go, people they've known for years might fall out of their network. New people come in. And that's certainly been my experience. My address book is vastly different these days from how it was 6 years ago. The relationships that we have with people before human design carry the energy of that time. The conditioning and the programming of it is inevitable, and some of those people just fall away. But when you keep on in your process and you commit to your experiment, you meet new people, new forces come in. And if you meet those new people as yourself, then you're having entirely new relationships. And you're having relationships that give you the opportunity to stay true to who you really are, because that's the way then that it is all set up. The people in our life from before, they have all sorts of ideas of how we should be, what we used to be like. They want to know why we don't behave the way we used to behave. Constant pressure to justify ourselves and to explain our way. And when you come into something like human design, it's incredible when you can just be yourself without justifying it. Somebody who has this line of creative block, they might find there are times when they're isolated and alone. It's a second line. That's not necessarily an uncomfortable place to be. But it can feel like there's nothing going on, nothing is happening. But then somebody knocks on their door, calls them into a new experience, a new possibility, and then that process begins again. It releases something in them, the muse arrives, and the block is released. And it's going to be an emotional experience. It's in a stream that goes through that emotional solar plexus. The wave, it's always moving. Nothing ever stays the same. Ra tells us that actually creative block is essential. These are people who need to be forced through their genetic nature, really, they need to be forced to stop, to go outside and have a walk in the woods or smell some flowers, take a break. And then when you come back, you'll be in a different place. And you might find you're able to complete your task with a new perspective on it. It's just the mechanism. It's not a curse, it's not a punishment. It can feel like that if you're unaware of the mechanic and if you don't enter into your relationships with others as yourself, and it can really be a problem. But that's not the way that it's really set up. And it's grounded in gate 5, line 2, called Inner Peace. So it's a nice line to have. The second line can have a lot of disadvantages. They're very exposed, they're quite vulnerable in a sense. And yet Ra said also that the second line is the most spiritual of lines. And this is the beauty that we find here in this second line of Inner Peace. And it's the beauty of the spirit that is being called out. And remember, genetic continuity, wherever you have a second line, then you have this potential to be called, which means that this inner peace is available in the midst of creative block. This is what is grounding gate 35. Venus is joining the sun today in gate 35 at 03:35, bringing a focus on the values and the beauty and the grace. Some experiences can maybe be judged as more valuable than others. Is there an opportunity to hold them all lightly and value them just for being our experience in that moment? Is it possible to find grace and beauty in the experience of our life or not? The moon is still in gate 51, the gate of shock in the ego center, and moves into gate 42 at 15:22. This is the gate of growth in the sacral center, the gate of endings and bringing things to a close correctly so that the cycle is truly closed off and doesn't have to loop around again for another go. Growth is an interesting thing. We don't always pay much attention to these cycles, assuming that things will always go on as they do. But whether we attend to them or not, the cycle continues. It's a funny thing when you just sitting with spring, for example, you can sit, and I've got a tree outside my window there, and of course going through winter it's been bare, and without even telling you which day it happened, all of a sudden it's fully dressed. I think, how did that happen? And it's that cycle that continues whether I attend to it or not. Gate 3 is next. Gate 3 is in the sacral center, and this is at 49:00:49, so sort of 10:1 tomorrow morning. Difficulty at the beginning. Another sacral gate, another format gate that wants to establish order because there's so much confusion in the world. And this is a gate in the channel of mutation. Things change, and sometimes they change very quickly, and that can be disorienting. So it's best to bring a little bit of order as soon as possible. Another way to look at it is the other way around, is that there needs to be order so that the mutation can actually take hold. Mutation comes into the world in a pulse and through response, and the right structures need to be in place to support it. How does that feel for you? You know, is this playing out in any way that you can recognize in your life? Does the moon bring any focus to these gates for you? How is your experiment going? Would you like to share? As always, I'm very curious. I love to know what's going on with other people and their experiment, how it feels for them, how these transits are landing with you. Because although I base them, of course, on the Ravi Ching and the Line Companion, and you know, it's basically Ra's work that I'm presenting to you, I put my own spin on it, of course, my own filters. I have my own conditioning that comes through. How does it land with you? Thank you, regardless of, well, anything that you may say. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking my words in and giving them time and room and digesting them. I appreciate you very much for doing that. Yeah, so I'll see you again tomorrow. Until then, as always, go gently.